this thing working? Give me some sound over here.
Yeah.
The Out of Bounds Show is powered by the award-winning golf courses at Dancing Rabbit Golf Club in Philadelphia, Mississippi.
SEC Insider Hit today, brought to you by Farm Bureau Insurance. Bundle your car and home and save with your Farm Bureau Insurance agent, favorites.com. We are the Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN, Mississippi State. 1-8 in league play, 21 games left. Can they make this is where it is now. Can they make the SEC baseball tournament? Dogs, both dogs are 1-8. So Mississippi State and Georgia, and then Ole Miss. And then you've got a group that's bundled in there at 3-6. Okay? So you're within striking distance, but how confident are you in that? Out of the three, I'd say Ole Miss is much more further advanced and a better team. Not that Mississippi State can't take 2 of 3 from them next weekend because they've owned that series. But the bottom line is it's DEFCON 1 in Starkville. And also I want to throw this out. I threw it out earlier. I think South Carolina's record's misleading. Most of the time when you're 8-1 in this conference, you're a bad dude. I don't think South Carolina is that good. They're good. I don't think they're like amazing, elite, scary. I don't. And so I think you wasted an opportunity to get 2 or 3 from a team that's good, but far from some of the teams over the last, including Mississippi State, that's had this type team, that have been damn good. Okay? So I don't, they're 8-1, but they don't, I don't think they've got that juice. Now, a month from now, they may be that good. May 10th, South Carolina may be that good. We've seen that in this state with Mississippi State and Ole Miss. You've been good, but then all of a sudden you're damn good when mid-May comes around. So, but this is where we are. Can they make the SEC baseball tournament? We welcome in Steve Robertson, Hail State Insider. 247 Sports, Gene's page. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Is it DEFCON 1 in Starkville right now, Steve?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. I think your goals are probably in line. At this point, you forget the NCAA tournament. I mean, you absolutely forget it. I mean, you're barring some miracle at this point, your hope is to make Hoover and be playing better baseball than you are the last month of the season. And, I think you make a good point. State should have won 2 out of 3 in this series. So they let the game slip away, on Thursday night. And then, in the 7th inning on Saturday, you look up and say, hey, the State's got a shot here. And then you blow it. Of course, the final score was misleading, but it is what it is. But, yeah, at this point, you got to abandon the hope of the NCAA tournament and, just realize the fact there are a lot of teams that are struggling in the Southeastern Conference. You got to go make hay against those teams. You got to be able to go get Auburn. You got to win 2 or 3 against Ole Miss. And I think that's just kind of the situation you're in now. You didn't hope to be in here, but it is what it is. And so now, what can you salvage from the season? I think you've got to get some experience from some of these younger guys who were the nucleus of this team moving forward. But anybody expecting this team to make an NCAA regional at this point, a little bit of a homer.
Yeah, no, it's 29 games in. So 27 games left, and 21 of those are SEC league games for Lamonis and the squad. So NCAA's off the table. Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds Show. What does Chris Lamonis have to do from here on out to keep his job?
Well, you got to win some ball games, and to be honest with you, I think this thing with Lamonis is. Again, 2 years removed from a national championship, and there's some people out there that are already off the boat, and I understand that. But, I think there have to be some changes made, and I think that the reality of it is if you're Zach Selmer and Dr. Mark Keenum, you look, okay, how did we get here? And do we have the coach in place to ensure we never get here again? I mean, there's always some ebb and flow in athletics. I mean, you never know really from one year to the next, who's going to stay healthy, and that's part of the game, right? And that's why you build depth. That's why you recruit at a high level, is that you always, you don't lose one player and your entire season is wrecked. And so, but yeah, you got to go win some ball games. And I do think they took a step this weekend, even after Thursday night's game. They lose the ball game. I think the consensus around the fan base is, hey, this team's getting better. and they go out and absolutely destroy them, South Carolina on Friday. And there was a lot of optimism about taking the series on Saturday. And of course that faded late, but I think they're, again, you're making some progress, but there are no moral victories in baseball at Mississippi State. I mean, that happens in some other programs, but you're not expected to be sweating out the SEC tournament in Starkville. You're expected to be competing for a regional host and potentially a top 8 national seed, and that's just not where State is.
Okay, give me a razor-focused answer on how did they get here?
Well, I mean, I think it's complex. I think the first thing is you had some big recruiting misses. And you've had some injuries. But, like, I go back to Jack Walker. He was the Louisiana Gatorade Player of the Year. Now, I'm not going to sit here and be critical of fine folks from Gatorade. I mean, I've enjoyed their products over the years. But when I watched film on Jack Walker, even when he was striking out all these guys at Barb High School, I thought, this kid can't do it in the Southeastern Conference. His stuff's not dynamic enough. He doesn't change planes. The velo clearly doesn't match what's being reported. And then all of a sudden he gets here and he's struggling midweek games against SWAC programs, and now he's somewhere else, And so you go out and you get those guys. And my philosophy when it comes to recruiting the state of Louisiana, if there's a kid out there that LSU is not sniffing, I don't want him. I don't want him. Now maybe it's a situation where they're offering 33% and we're offering 50%, and we can get that kid. But I am not the least bit interested in a baseball prospect from the state of Louisiana that LSU is not serious about. Because if they're not good enough to play at LSU, they shouldn't be good enough to play here. And that is going to be so difficult to beat them in their home state. But if there's a guy out there that's racking up all these awards, clearly LSU knows something that we don't. We're not that smart, right? You understand what I'm saying? We're not going to outsmart LSU on the Gatorade Player of the Year and then him come in here and dominate. And that's just one example. But go back and look at those 20 and 21 classes, and, there is a lack of veteran guys who have been around in this bullpen. And you look at the more dominant arms, you look at Nate Dome, you look at the fact that Durangelo, Sanji, and Bradley Lofton are already becoming fan favorites. It's because there was a gap there. But there can't be this gap in the pitching staff. And I've asked Chris Simonis that, and he told me, he said, I can't really explain that. How do you go from having the staff that set an NCAA record for strikeouts in 2021 and won a national championship, and 2 years later you're having to rely on freshmen? That's a failure of the staff. You absolutely cannot get in that position. And I understand that things happen. Guys get injured. Guys don't develop perhaps at the rates you expected. But at Mississippi State, you absolutely cannot have two classes where you get next to nothing on the pitching side.
What do you make of somebody like Mikey Tepper transferring to Liberty and looks great?
Does he look great?
Or really good?
Last time I looked, he was 0-3 with about a 5.6 ERA. And so that opens up a different question. It'd be one, if he went somewhere and was dominating, you could say, well, this is a situation where perhaps he didn't take coaching. I think the guy's just a miss. I think he's a guy that throws hard, but he doesn't necessarily know how to pitch. And I think the numbers reflect that. If he didn't succeed here and he's not succeeding somewhere else, then the analysis would suggest that perhaps the problem is him and not necessarily Scott Foxhall. If he had struggled here and was dominating there, I mean, I think he had that big opening weekend, I guess that good outing against Southern Miss, and I think we've kind of gotten away from what's happened to him since then. So unless he picked up a win over the weekend, I don't think he's won a ball game yet.
He went 6 2/3, allowing 2 runs on 2 hits, and struck out 13 over the weekend. So,
well, there you go. So good for him.
All right. So, what can you get this thing right in June? If Lemonis can make changes, I think apathy's already set in. So I think this is going to be a fine line for a new AD who's been in the room. I'm confident when people were let go and hired, because you are as an executive VP, associate AD at Oklahoma. So he's been able to see how that all unfolds. But if apathy has set in and they decide to keep Lemonis and he gets to make a bunch of changes, what's realistic about people coming in knowing that he may only have a year to get it? He'll only have a year to get it right. And what can they do in 60 days or less to flip the roster?
Yeah, and those are the questions, right? I mean, it's kind of like the end of the Jackie Sherrill era, right? I mean, what's the quality of assistant coaches you can get when perhaps the people think you're a dead man walking. I mean, it happens all across the country. It's not just Jermaine and Mississippi State. When you have a coach has one season to coach for their job, the talent pool for assistant coaches is difficult. It's pretty shallow in that respect. And let's say that Lamonis is retained, and all of a sudden you make all these staffing changes. What's a quality guy you're going to be able to go get? And listen, baseball matters at Oklahoma too. It's not like now, probably not at the same level today than it did, years ago. But State played Oklahoma here in a regional back in in 18, or 19. But the reality of it is Zach Selman's not oblivious to the tradition of Mississippi State. I see Zach out at Duke Noble Field all the time. And, yeah, this is a difficult situation because the expectations for Mississippi State are not like they are in most places in the country when it comes to college baseball. It's not just something that people do after spring football is over and before the summer camp start. I mean, the reality of it is that baseball matters. And, again, this past Saturday, you had over 12,000 people show up to watch a team that's 1-7 in the SEC. So Bulldog fans expect to win.
Okay, they've got 3 series coming up: at Bama, Ole Miss at home, at Auburn. None of the 3 teams are great. Doesn't mean that they don't have players. I understand they all do. I said a huge deal would be 3-6 or 4-5. I think 5-4 is off the table. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think 5-4 is probably tough to get to. But I tell you the thing is, I'm actually going to write this column today. And with Cade Smith coming back, and Cade was good over the weekend, and Cade's a guy, people say, well, he's not a true Friday night guy. Hey, I'll take a Sunday guy right now. State has got to have somebody on the weekend that can go out there and get SEC hitters out. And Cade showed that he could do that last year. And so if Cade is available to go to the weekend, I think you got to put Nate back in the bullpen, because if you have Nate Dahm available to you in the bullpen on Saturday, you win that series. Or perhaps you have him on Thursday, you win that series. State does not have anybody at this point that you can look at and say, this guy can go out there and get those final 6 and 9 outs for me and get us into the dugout with a win. And I know we advocated for Nate earlier because of the fact you didn't have a lot of other arms available, but maybe perhaps that there needs to be some new evaluation and all that. If Cade is back and Cade can give you 5 innings on a weekend, I think you got to push Nate back there, because I don't think there's anybody in this bullpen right now that can go close out a ball game and get Mississippi State a win.
Good Lord. Out of Bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Our guests join us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Steve Robertson stopping by to talk Hail State baseball. So with Cade healthy, and Lamonis said Lofton would pitch this weekend. So what you're thinking is Gerangelo, Cade, and Lofton on the weekend. In what order would you like to see?
Well, I mean, I think, maybe Cade's a middle reliever, or maybe Lofton's a middle reliever, or maybe Gartman becomes a middle reliever. I think Gart pitched really well this weekend, and I saw an edge with him, but I don't know that I've seen this year. And I think he really responded well, and you did a good job spotting up that change. And to be honest with you, I thought State had a great game plan from pitching standpoint against South Carolina. They're a launch angle fastball hunting team, and they even had Gerangelo up there pitching backwards, throwing 79 to 81 mile an hour changeups and getting everybody out on their front foot. So the game plan was solid. They just couldn't fully execute. But I think KC can probably give you a couple of innings here. Gart can give you a couple of innings there, and I think that now with Cade Smith getting healthy, you have some options. But, Bradley Lofton, was all the talk last week as he was going to the weekend, then he didn't pitch, and had somebody message me, I guess, on Wednesday that said they heard that he was a little bit sore, not injured, just sore, may not pitch. And you hate that because he's been off now, 2 weeks. And so you got a game against Grambling tomorrow. And so I wonder, is he an opener tomorrow? Does he go out there and just basically get a bullpen game and then, pitch on the weekends? But, now you're starting to get some guys healthy. And so it does give you some options on the weekend. But at this point, I think you just got to take it a game at a time. You got to marry some guys up. And I thought Colby Holcomb was outstanding on Thursday. And so maybe that works. Maybe you throw Gerangelo and then bring Colby in behind him. If you have a lead, you go to Nixon or go to Dome. And so I think now what you start looking at, instead of looking at this as a matchup to matchup type thing, is, who gives us a different look? Because there's a lot of guys out there that are throwing on the same plane, throwing from the same arm slot. And so all of a sudden you replace one guy, bring him in, replace him with a guy that's doing the same thing. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so I think, again, you got to give a variety of looks to hitters out there, and you got to have a good game plan. But I do think Cade Smith coming back, and hopefully Pico can come back at some point, even though I've been told he's still having some tightness. You really need those guys that have some SEC innings under their belt to be available down the stretch if State's going to make anything of the season.
Okay, and it looks like they're missing like a toughness component, a dude factor. I think they've got one, but he's a freshman, so that'll be next year, and Ross Highfield. It just looks like as soon as things start to get away from them, there's not anybody there to get their mind right and push through it like you have to do in SEC games in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think there is some of that. And I think, again, some of the more vocal guys are the younger guys. And, of course, they don't command a lot of respect in the locker room yet. I mean, that's just the reality of sport, right? I mean, that's not a criticism of anybody. That's just kind of how it is. And some of the veteran guys on this team are kind of lead by example. But, it's just like having a guy like Rowdy Jordan, a guy like Tanner Allen. And I've heard a million stories about, late in ball games, those two are talking to each other, and Rowdy's like, okay, boys, here we go. We're just going to go win this thing. And then you do, right? And so then that gives everybody else in the clubhouse a little more confidence in you. It's like, hey, this is our guy. He's going to get it done. And heard a discussion about that back in 21, right before Tanner Allen goes up there and hits a bases clear and triple. He looks back at the dugout and he winks and says, hey, watch this. And then he goes up there and gets the AB. And one of the defining moments of the season at that point, And so I don't know if you have anybody that has that kind of charisma, but it's not just about what you say. I mean, you got to walk it like you talk it. And I think that's what made those guys great, the Jake Mangums, the Brent Rookers, and people like that, is the fact that it wasn't just that they were the most vocal guys. When it came up clutch time situations, they delivered. And it seemed, when I wrote the book Dogpile, every time that Tanner Allen came up late in the ball game, with one exception, he came through and got the big hit. And so then all of a sudden, it's not just the team, it's the crowd. I mean, how many times in the 8th or 9th inning did Tanner Allen come up and the crowd's like, something big is about to happen? And then it did. And I think State is missing that quality. Of course, it's SEC Player of the Year. It's not fair to compare everybody to that, but State needs that guy to come in that big moment where everybody's like, hey, this is fixing to happen. The maroon and white chant's fixing to get rolling because somebody's about to produce some maroon magic.
This has happened twice in the 2000s. A proud program has absolutely bottomed out. Polk 2 and Lamonas. John walked into a train wreck. Cohen. They were by far and away the worst roster in the SEC. Cohen is known as the SOB. And I know Chris has got some bite in him, but I think he's much more Polk than Cohen. Does it take a hard ass and somebody with an enormous amount of FU to run this gauntlet? First of all, to take the pressure of this job, and because it is high profile, and then to grind out wins in this league, because your fans' expectations are to be in the top 3 or 4, but you have several other teams that recruit as well or better than you in Florida, Vandy, LSU, and Arkansas. So walk me through the perfect profile of a coach, Mississippi State baseball.
Well, one thing I'll say, too, that 2015 year for John wasn't a very good one either. Of course, he didn't lay in the valley. Of course, you played for an Alpha Championship in 13. You're back in a regional in 14. And you had the bad 15 year. And in 16, you win an SEC championship. But a lot of that is exactly for what you described. There's a lot of gentlemen in baseball. Mike Martin was a guy, too, that a lot of people loved. And, of course, he kind of mellowed in his latter years. And I think the results kind of reflected that. But if you look at who is really successful, and I haven't had a lot of interaction with Mike Bianco, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mike, and they have built a tradition there that was really kind of non-existent, before he got there. I mean, it's an amazing thing what he's done. They're in contention every year for some big things, whether it be hosting or supers or whatever. But you look at Dave Van Horn. Dave Van Horn's never going to be invited to the Chamber of Commerce ribbon cutting ceremony for anything. I mean, he's not that kind of guy. He's not the guy you'd have over, when you're going to have, your kid's birthday party. I mean, he's a little bit prickly, and you look at Jay Johnson at LSU. I got some friends that work at LSU, and they'll tell you, I said, hey, that guy's really driven, and he's kind of rubbed some people the wrong way, but he's got the number one team in the country, so nobody's going to say anything, You look back at what John did. I mean, and John is a guy, too, and I've considered a friend for a long time, but, John's a guy that's like, hey, this is where we're going. This is our goal, and I'm going there. And if you're doing anything that impedes my progress, then you're a distraction, and you've got to go. And I think John is laser focused on those kinds of things, and especially as a baseball coach. He was just one of those kind of people that once he got his mind made up about something, this is what we're going to go do. And I think you need a guy like that. You need that guy, even like a Nick Mangione. I mean, look at Nick right now, and I laugh because I had some discussions with some friends of mine in a group text about this sort of stuff, and I keep bringing it up. Guys, Kentucky 10-run ruled Missouri twice over the weekend. That's a team that swept Tennessee. Kentucky now 8-1 in the Southeastern Conference, and you start breaking this thing down. Both they're 6 SEC wins away from being in an NCAA tournament. And if they can win maybe a couple of games here and there and avoid getting it swept by Tennessee and Vanderbilt, Kentucky may be hosting the best start in school history in the SEC. And Nick is a guy, too, I can tell you. If you poll the league coaches about who's your favorite coach, Nick probably doesn't get a vote. And some of that's because of how he manages the game, because he gets under people's skin.
Do you think he would take the job?
Oh,
but here's the deal, though. I understand Kentucky, Mississippi State baseball. I've grown up. I get it. I know what Cohen had to do walking in there, winning 44 games in their first SEC championship when he took the job. But if he punches his ticket to the postseason, he's good for another several years at Kentucky, making a ton of money. At Mississippi State, that's not the case, as you know. I know he's been there. I know he was the lead recruiter on Jake Mangum. That'll get people hot and bothered, and that's all great and good. But is it guaranteed that he would take the job if Zach Selman offered? Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I've known Nick a long time, and I would say it's probably 95%. Kentucky has a special place to Nick because it's really where he got his start in college coaching. This is a guy that used to live in his car and shower in the clubhouse. I mean, when he was a volunteer assistant coach, which is an indictment on the NCAA, and we can have that discussion another day. But I know it's a special place. But I also know this. I know that there's about 400 people that go watch baseball games at Kentucky.
No doubt.
Baseball that Saturday. It's a men's basketball school, and then that loves football, and then they kind of fill the baseball team because they have to. And so the expectations aren't strong there. They would be here, but I think knowing Nick's personality, yeah, Nick would love to have the opportunity.
Or do you just offer $1.8 to $2 million to Cliff Godwin? Because regardless of what the rival in the state says, if you do want that, that's not Mississippi State's MO to go big from the jump. But if you offer Godwin right at $2 million, he's coming. Yes or no?
No, I don't think it's anybody. I think you came the last time they were serious about taking it.
I agree.
I don't care what they say either. I don't care what anybody else says. Money talks.
Yep. All right. Thanks for the call. Thanks for jumping on. Steve Robertson, GenesPage.com, the Boneyard Podcast. On the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, do you just go offer Cliff Godwin right at $2 million?